Isabella Lancaster, soaked through her designer coat, hammers frantically on a stranger's door as thunder crashes overhead. If you've ever felt powerless, hit like and subscribe. The rain had been falling for 3 hours, turning the city streets into rivers of chaos. Isabella Lancaster stood outside apartment 4B, her $1,000 heels ruined, her perfectly styled hair plastered against her face. She had never felt so vulnerable in her 28 years of privilege. Mark Thompson opened the door to find a woman who looked like she'd been through hell. Her expensive clothing couldn't hide the desperation in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she clutched her soaked purse. "Please," Isabella said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm locked out. My building's security system failed, and I have nowhere else to go." Mark hesitated for only a moment. Behind him, his 10-year-old daughter Lily peered around the corner, her curious eyes wide with concern for the stranger at their door. "Come in," Mark said, stepping aside. "You'll catch pneumonia out there." The sound of rain hammering against windows filled the small apartment as Isabella stepped inside, water dripping from her coat onto the worn carpet. She looked around at the cramped space. Children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, textbooks scattered on a coffee table, a couch that had seen better days. "I'm Mark Thompson," he said, offering her a towel from a nearby closet. "This is my daughter, Lily." "Isabella," she replied, accepting the towel gratefully. She didn't mention her last name. "Not yet," Lily approached with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "You look like a princess," she said. "A really wet princess." Despite everything, Isabella smiled. "Thank you. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all day." Mark disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a steaming mug of coffee. "It's not much, but it'll warm you up." Isabella wrapped her fingers around the mug, feeling the heat seep through her cold hands. She studied Mark's face, kind eyes, tired but genuine. He worked for Lancaster Corporation. She could tell from the company badge barely visible on his jacket hanging by the door. "You don't know who I am, do you?" she asked quietly. "Should I?" Mark replied, settling into a chair across from her. Isabella took a sip of the coffee. It was cheap, instant, nothing like the imported blend she was accustomed to. Yet somehow, it tasted better than anything she'd had in months. "No," she said finally. "I suppose you shouldn't." Outside, lightning illuminated the city skyline, casting stark shadows across the modest apartment. Isabella Lancaster, heiress to a corporate empire worth billions, sat in a stranger's living room, planning the downfall of her own father. She just didn't know that Mark Thompson would become the key to everything. The storm raged on, as if the city itself sensed the upheaval that was about to begin. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Isabella had called her building's emergency maintenance line 6 times, only to receive the same automated message about system failures and delayed repairs. By 10 o'clock, it became clear she wouldn't be going home tonight. "You can take my room," Mark offered, folding a blanket on the couch. "I'll sleep out here." "I couldn't possibly." "It's fine," Mark interrupted gently. "Lily's already excited about having a sleepover guest. She's been practicing her bedtime story reading." Isabella watched as Mark prepared the couch with practiced efficiency. His movements revealed a man accustomed to making do with less, someone who had learned to find comfort in small spaces and simple gestures. "You work for Lancaster Corporation," Isabella observed, nodding toward his employee badge. That Mark's expression tightened slightly. "Operations management. Level 3. Been there 8 years now. Do you enjoy it?" Mark paused, choosing his words carefully. "It pays the bills. Provides health insurance for Lily. That's what matters. But do you enjoy it?" Isabella pressed. "Honestly, it's gotten harder lately. New policies, longer hours, fewer benefits. They've cut our department budget 3 times this year, but somehow expect us to maintain the same productivity levels." Mark shook his head. "Sorry, you probably don't want to hear about corporate politics." "Actually, I do." Isabella leaned forward. "Tell me more." Mark studied her face, searching for genuine interest. He found it. "Well, they've been pushing this new efficiency initiative. Sounds great on paper: streamlined processes, automated systems, improved profit margins. In reality, it means half the staff doing twice the work for the same pay. And management doesn't care? Management doesn't know? Or they pretend not to know?" Mark's voice carried years of frustration. Victor Lancaster runs that company like his personal kingdom. Everything flows through him, and nothing flows back. Down to us. Isabella absorbed every word, filing away details about employee morale and operational inefficiencies. Her father's empire was cracking from within, just as she had suspected. What about advancement opportunities? She asked. For people like me? Non-existent. I've applied for supervisor positions 4 times in the past 2 years. Each time they promote someone from outside the company or move someone from another department. People with connections, people who know the right names to drop. Lily emerged from her bedroom in polka-dot pajamas, carrying a worn picture book. Daddy, can I read to Isabella? It's getting late, sweetheart. Please? Just one story. Isabella smiled. I'd love to hear a story. As Lily settled beside Isabella on the couch and began reading about a brave knight rescuing a village, Mark continued tidying up the small apartment. Isabella watched him work. This man who had opened his door to a stranger, who worked tirelessly for a company that barely acknowledged his existence, who raised his daughter with such obvious love and dedication. Daddy says the knight reminds him of himself, Lily said proudly. He fights dragons every day. What kind of dragons? Isabella asked. The invisible kind. The ones that try to make people sad at work. Mark's cheeks reddened. Lily has quite an imagination. I think she's very perceptive, Isabella replied. Meeting Mark's eyes point 20 blocks away, Victor Lancaster stood in his penthouse office, staring at the storm through floor-to-ceiling windows. His assistant, Patricia, had been trying to reach Isabella for hours. Sir, her phone is still going straight to voicemail. Patricia reported nervously. Building security confirmed she left around 6:30, but the doorman doesn't recall seeing her return. Victor's jaw tightened. Isabella had been acting strangely for weeks, missing family dinners, asking pointed questions about company operations, spending time with board members she had previously ignored. Now she was missing entirely during a crisis that had shut down half the city. Have you checked with her friends? She doesn't really have friends, sir. You know how private she is. Victor did know. He had raised Isabella to be independent, self-reliant, focused solely on the family business. But lately, her independence felt more like rebellion. Contact building management. I want security footage from every camera in a 3-block radius. Someone must have seen where she went. Patricia hesitated. Sir, it's nearly midnight. Perhaps we should wait until morning. Now, Patricia, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt trapped by circumstances beyond your control? As Patricia scurried away to make calls, Victor's mind raced through possibilities. Isabella wasn't the type to disappear without purpose. Every action she took was calculated, deliberate. If she was missing tonight, during this storm, it was because she wanted to be missing. The question was why. Meanwhile, back in Mark's apartment, Isabella tucked a sleeping Lily into the makeshift bed Mark had prepared on the living room floor. The little girl had insisted on camping out with their guest, transforming the evening into an adventure. She's wonderful, Isabella whispered as she and Mark watched Lily's peaceful breathing. She's my whole world, Mark replied softly. Everything I do is for her future. What kind of future do you want for her? Mark considered the question. One where she has choices. Where she doesn't have to worry about making rent or choosing between groceries and medicine. Where she can pursue her dreams without wondering if she's worthy of them. Isabella felt something shift inside her chest. A recognition of shared values, shared hopes. This man, struggling to provide for his daughter on his meager salary, wanted the same thing she wanted: fairness, opportunity, dignity. Mark, she said quietly, what if I told you there might be a way to change things at Lancaster Corporation? To make it better for employees like you? Mark's eyes searched her face in the dim lamplight. I'd say that sounds too good to be true. People like me don't get to change companies like Lancaster. We just survive them. But what if you could? Before Mark could answer, his phone buzzed with an emergency alert from Lancaster Corporation's HR department. All employees were to report any unusual contacts or requests for company information. Anyone with knowledge of suspicious activity should contact security immediately. Mark frowned at the message. That's odd. We only get alerts like this for major security breaches. Isabella's pulse quickened. Her father was mobilizing resources, which meant he was worried, which meant her absence was having the intended effect. Must be related to the storm, she said casually. Companies get paranoid during emergencies. Mark nodded, accepting the explanation. But as he prepared for bed, a nagging question remained. Why did their mysterious guest seem so interested in his complaints about Lancaster Corporation? And why did her questions feel less like curiosity and more like reconnaissance? The storm continued its assault on the city, masking the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway outside apartment 4B.3 hours earlier. Victor Lancaster had been reviewing quarterly reports when he noticed the discrepancies, revenue numbers that didn't match departmental budgets, employee satisfaction surveys that had mysteriously disappeared from board presentations, financial records that seemed to have been accessed by someone with executive-level clearance, someone who knew exactly where to look. Now, as dawn broke, over the storm-battered city, Isabella sat across from Mark at his small kitchen table, watching him prepare breakfast for Lily. The domesticity of the moment, scrambled eggs, toast cut into triangles, orange juice in mismatched glasses, felt surreal after a night spent in enemy territory. "Mark," she said carefully, "I need to tell you something. About who I am." Mark paused, coffee mug halfway to his lips. "I figured you weren't just any random person locked out in the rain. My name is Isabella Lancaster." The mug hit the table. With a sharp clink, coffee splashed across the worn wood surface. "You're," Mark's voice caught. "You're Victor Lancaster's daughter." "Yes, and I need your help." Mark stood abruptly, moving away from the table. "This is insane. You can't be here. If anyone finds out I'm harboring the CEO's daughter, they won't find out. You don't understand. People like me, we don't associate with people like you. We don't have conversations like this. We certainly don't let you sleep in our apartments." Isabella remained seated, her voice steady. "What if I told you I'm trying to remove my father from power?" Mark stopped pacing. "What?" "For months, I've been gathering evidence of his illegal activities. Labor law violations, financial fraud, bribery of city officials. The man you work for is a criminal, Mark, and I'm going to expose him. Why should I believe you?" Isabella reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table. "Because I can prove it." Mark reluctantly sat back down, scrolling through documents that made his blood run cold. Emails discussing deliberate safety violations to cut costs, spreadsheets showing wage theft across multiple departments, photos of substandard worker housing that Lancaster Corporation provided for minimum wage employees. "This is..." Mark's hands trembled as he read. "This is everything we suspected but could never prove. There's more. But I need someone with insider access to retrieve the financial records that tie it all together. Someone who can access the company's servers without raising suspicion. You want me to steal from Lancaster Corporation? I want you to help me save it. And everyone who works there." Mark pushed the tablet away. "I could lose my job. I could go to prison. What happens to Lily if I get arrested? What happens to her if you don't?" Isabella leaned forward. "Mark, my father is planning massive layoffs after the next board meeting. 30% of the workforce, including your entire department. He's moving operations overseas where he can pay workers a fraction of what you earn." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. "How do you know this?" "Because I've been sitting in on board meetings, pretending to learn the family business while actually documenting every crime he commits." Isabella's voice hardened. "He thinks I'm his obedient heir. He has no idea I'm the one who's been feeding information to the Department of Labor." Mark stared at her, trying to reconcile this revelation with the vulnerable woman who had stood at his door 12 hours earlier. The storm, being locked out. This was all planned. No, that was genuine. But when I ended up here, when I met you, Isabella glanced toward Lily's sleeping form on the couch. "When I saw what my father's policies are doing to families like yours, it became personal." A sharp knock at the door froze them both. "Mark Thompson," a deep voice called from the hallway. "Building security. We need to speak with you." Mark's face went pale. Isabella grabbed his arm. "Don't answer it. They know I'm here. If I don't answer, they'll use a master key." The knocking intensified. "Mr. Thompson, please open the door. We have reports of suspicious activity in your apartment." Lily stirred on the couch, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy? What's happening?" Isabella made a split-second decision. She moved toward the bedroom. "I was never here. You found your door unlocked this morning. Nothing missing, no sign of forced entry. You have no idea who might have been inside." "Isabella, wait. If they ask about the coffee cups, Tell them you couldn't sleep and made extra. She paused at the bedroom doorway. Mark, whatever happens next, remember that your daughter needs a father who fights for what's right. The door handle rattled as someone inserted a key. Mark approached the door slowly, his mind racing through possible explanations. Through the peephole, he saw two men in dark suits, definitely not building security. Who is it? He called. Lancaster Corporation Security Division. We're conducting a routine check of employee residences following last night's emergency protocols. Mark's heart pounded. There were no routine checks. Lancaster Corporation had never sent anyone to employee homes before. He opened the door to find two imposing men with expensive shoes and cold eyes. Behind them stood a third figure, Patricia, Victor Lancaster's assistant. Mr. Thompson, Patricia said with false warmth. I apologize for the early hour. We're following up on some unusual network activity traced to employee accounts. May we come in? Mark stepped aside, knowing he had no choice. As the security team entered his apartment, he caught Patricia's eyes scanning the room, noting the extra coffee cups, the displaced furniture, the lingering scent of expensive perfume. Daddy, Lily called from the couch. Who are these people? Just some people from work, sweetheart. Go brush your teeth. Patricia smiled thinly. Beautiful daughter. You must worry about her safety constantly in a neighborhood like this. The threat was unmistakable. Mark felt the walls closing in around him, understanding with crystal clarity that his life had just changed forever. In the bedroom, Isabella pressed her ear to the door, listening to every word and knowing that Mark Thompson, kind, principled. Mark Thompson had just become collateral damage in a war he never signed up to fight. The question now was whether he would become her ally or her victim. After Patricia and the security team left, Mark sat in stunned silence at his kitchen table. The message had been delivered with surgical precision. Lancaster Corporation was watching him. One wrong move, and everything he had worked to build for Lily would disappear. Isabella emerged from the bedroom once the footsteps had faded down the hallway. Her face was grim but determined. They know, Mark said flatly. They suspect. There's a difference. Isabella sat across from him. My father always operates on assumptions rather than facts. It's his weakness. His weakness? They just threatened my daughter. Which means we're getting close to something he desperately wants to protect. Mark rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. You don't understand. I can't risk Lily's future for your corporate revolution. She's all I have. And what future will she have if my father continues destroying lives? Isabella's voice was urgent but controlled. Mark, those layoffs I mentioned, they're scheduled for next month. Your department is first on the list. You're lying. Isabella pulled out her phone, showing him an email chain between Victor and the board of directors. Mark's name appeared on a spreadsheet titled Non-Essential Personnel, Phase 1 Elimination. The room seemed to tilt. 8 years of loyalty, of 60-hour weeks, and missed bedtime stories, reduced to a line item in a cost-cutting measure. Daddy. Lily's voice came from the doorway. She had been quietly listening, her 10-year-old mind processing the adult conversation with surprising clarity. Are you going to lose your job? Mark's throat tightened. We're just talking, sweetheart. Lily walked over and climbed onto his lap. Remember what you told me about the night story? How sometimes the knight has to fight the dragon even when he's scared. This is different, Lily. This is real life. But you said real life has dragons too. The invisible ones that make people sad. She looked at Isabella with solemn eyes. Is she trying to fight the dragons? Isabella nodded slowly. Yes, I am. Then you should help her, Daddy. Knights are supposed to help each other. Mark held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the simple trust of her small arms around his neck. In her world, good always triumphed over evil. Heroes made sacrifices because it was right, not because it was safe. Lily, go get ready for school, he said. Quietly, after she left, Mark sat in contemplative silence. He thought about his father, who had worked construction for 30 years and died at 58 from a heart attack brought on by stress and exhaustion. He thought about his colleagues, good people trapped in a system designed to exploit their desperation. He thought about Lily, growing up in a world where corporations could destroy families without consequence. If I do this, he said finally, and we fail, Lily loses everything. If you don't do this, she loses everything anyway. Isabella's voice was gentle but unwavering. Mark, my father has spent decades convincing people like you that resistance is futile. That's how he maintains power, by making you believe you're powerless. Mark looked around his modest apartment, at the second-hand furniture and the carefully budgeted life he had built from nothing. What exactly are you asking me to do? The financial records I need are stored on secure servers in the accounting department. Your employee access can get us past the initial security protocols. From there, I can handle the technical aspects. You want me to break into Lancaster Corporation. I want you to reclaim what belongs to the employees, proof of wage theft, safety violations, and environmental crimes that directly impact the communities where your coworkers live. Mark stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city where thousands of Lancaster Corporation employees were starting another day of exploitation disguised as employment. When? Tonight. The board meeting is tomorrow morning. It's our only chance. That evening, Mark stood outside the Lancaster Corporation building, his hands trembling as he swiped his employee badge. The lobby was empty except for a single security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper. Isabella waited in a rented car around the corner, monitoring police scanners and coordinating with board members who had grown tired of Victor's tyrannical leadership. She had spent the day making careful phone calls, reminding shareholders of their fiduciary responsibilities and the legal liability they faced if they continued enabling fraud. That Mark's voice crackled through the earpiece she had given him. I'm in the elevator. Remember, act naturally. You're just checking on a system error that came in after hours. The accounting department was dark except for the green glow of server lights. Mark found the terminal Isabella had described, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Once he logged in, there would be no going back. That he thought about Lily, asleep at his neighbor's apartment, trusting him to come home safely. He thought about Patricia's cold smile and the implicit threat in her words. He thought about the spreadsheet with his name marked for elimination. Comment below if you'd take the same risk for justice. Mark typed in his credentials. The files Isabella needed were exactly where she said they would be. Years of financial manipulation, documented communications about illegal activities, photographic evidence of safety violations that had resulted in worker injuries Victor had covered up through bribes and intimidation. As the data transferred to Isabella's secure server, Mark felt something shift inside him. The fear was still there, but it was accompanied by something he hadn't felt in years, the sense that he was fighting back. Transfer complete, he whispered into the earpiece. Beautiful work. Now get out of there. Mark was halfway to the elevator when he froze. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell, security guards making an unscheduled round. Isabella's voice was urgent in his ear. Mark, whatever happens, do not let them see the files. Delete the browser history, clear the cache, make sure there's no trace of what you accessed. Mark's fingers flew over the keyboard, erasing digital footprints as the footsteps grew closer. The elevator doors opened just as the stairwell door began to creak. He stepped inside, his heart hammering as the floors counted down. In 12 hours, Isabella would present evidence that could topple an empire. In 12 hours, Victor Lancaster would face consequences for decades of unchecked power. In 12 hours, Mark Thompson would discover whether courage was worth the price he might have to pay. Meanwhile, across the city, Isabella sat in her rented car, uploading files that would change everything. Board members were already receiving anonymous packages containing preliminary evidence. Journalists were being contacted with tips about a major corporate scandal breaking tomorrow. The pieces were in motion, and Victor Lancaster had no idea that his own daughter had just loaded the ammunition that would bring down his kingdom. But revolutions, Isabella knew, were won and lost in the final moments. And tomorrow morning would determine whether justice or power would ultimately prevail. The Lancaster Corporation boardroom had never seen anything like it. 37 shareholders, 12 board members, and a handful of senior executives sat in stunned silence as Mark Thompson, a mid-level operations manager they barely knew existed, presented evidence that shattered their understanding of the company they thought they controlled. These documents show systematic wage theft totaling $47 million over 3 years, Mark said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Money stolen directly from employees who trusted this company to honor their contracts. Victor. Lancaster sat at the head of the mahogany table, his face a mask of controlled fury. This is preposterous. Mr. Thompson, you're obviously acting under duress or influence. I'm acting under the influence of truth. Mark interrupted, meeting Victor's glare without flinching. Something this company has forgotten. Isabella rose from her seat, the folder in her hands containing years of carefully gathered evidence. The floor recognizes Isabella Lancaster. You're out of order, Victor snapped. This meeting is being conducted according to corporate bylaws. Board member Harrison Wells interjected. Isabella has the right to address shareholders regarding matters of corporate governance. Isabella walked to the front of the room, her heels clicking against marble floors that had witnessed decades of decisions affecting thousands of lives. For 28 years, I believed in this company. I believed in the man who built it. Today, I stand before you not as Victor Lancaster's daughter, but as someone who refuses to inherit a legacy of exploitation. She opened the folder, revealing photographs that made several board members gasp. These images show worker housing conditions that violate federal safety standards. The people living in these buildings, Lancaster Corporation employees, have been paying rent for accommodations that wouldn't meet requirements for livestock. Isabella, you don't understand the complexities, Victor began. I understand perfectly. Isabella's voice cut through his protest like steel. I understand that you've been using shell companies to avoid environmental regulations. I understand that you've been bribing city inspectors to overlook safety violations. I understand that you plan to eliminate 30% of our workforce while awarding yourself a $20 million bonus. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Victor's face went pale as Isabella continued. But most importantly, I understand that this company can be better, must be better, will be better. Mark watched from his seat, amazed by Isabella's transformation. The vulnerable woman who had knocked on his door 2 nights ago had become a force of nature, channeling righteous anger into precise, devastating words. The evidence before you represents crimes that demand accountability, Isabella continued. But more than that, it represents an opportunity. We can choose to be a company that values human dignity over profit margins. We can choose to be leaders in corporate responsibility rather than enablers of systemic injustice. Board member Patricia Chin stood. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Victor Lancaster as Chief Executive Officer. Seconded, Wells. Added quickly. Victor's composure finally cracked. You ungrateful child. I built this empire for you. Everything I did was to secure your future. You built a prison, Isabella replied quietly. And you called it a legacy. The vote was unanimous. 37 shareholders and 11 of 12 board members voted to remove Victor Lancaster from all corporate positions. The 12th abstained. Victor himself, stripped of authority in the space of 10 minutes. AS security escorted Victor from the building. Isabella was appointed interim CEO with a mandate to implement immediate reforms. Her first act was to announce the cancellation of all planned layoffs and the establishment of a $50 million fund for employee compensation and workplace improvements. 3 months later, Isabella stood outside a bright apartment in a neighborhood where children played safely in well-maintained parks. She carried a bottle of champagne and a gift wrapped in silver paper. Mark opened the door with paint-stained fingers and a genuine smile. Isabella. Perfect timing. Lily just finished decorating her new room. The apartment was twice the size of Mark's old place, filled with natural light and the warmth of a family no longer living paycheck to paycheck. Mark had declined Isabella's offer of a corporate promotion, choosing instead to start his own consulting firm specializing in worker advocacy, funded by a generous loan from the Lancaster Corporation Employee Development Initiative. Look, Lily came running down the hallway, her arms covered in rainbow paint. I painted a castle with knights and dragons, and the knights are winning. Isabella knelt to Lily's level, admiring the colorful artwork. That's beautiful. Which knight is your daddy? The one fighting the biggest dragon, Lily said proudly. He's very brave. Mark joined them in the living room, where the evening light streaming through large windows created patterns on walls decorated with Lily's artwork and family photographs. Coffee, he offered. I've upgraded to the good stuff. Isabella laughed, remembering that first night when instant coffee had tasted like hope. I'd love some. As they sat together, Watching Lily play with toys she no longer had to choose between, Isabella felt something she had never experienced in her father's penthouse. The satisfaction of power used correctly. Any regrets? Mark asked quietly. Isabella shook her head. My father taught me that power was about control. You taught me that power is about choice, giving people the freedom to choose dignity over desperation, hope over fear. Outside, the city hummed with the energy of a million lives intersecting, each person fighting their own dragons, each victory small but significant. Inside apartment 7C, three people who had found courage in each other's company continued writing a story about justice that began with a stranger knocking on a door during a storm. Join our community, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories of everyday heroes who changed the world.